All right, so we are going to continue on with our digestive chapter and talk through the structures and how the digestive system works. So you should have your digestion packet, and looking at the first slide, it just talks about some of the things that the digestive system actually does for us. So ingestion, mechanical digestion, chemical digestion, propulsion, absorption, and defecation. So when we look at the process of eating, one of the things that people kind of have a misconception about is they know we eat and we use the calories to kind of fuel our body, but there are a lot of things about the digestive process that people don't often consider or don't often realize. And so when we talk about digestion, the first thing that I kind of like to introduce is the idea if you think about the human body and what we're made up of, you guys have your skin, your muscles, your internal organs, you have all of these body parts that make you up. And if you consider the food that you eat, there is nothing in your body that is made out of the things that you eat. So think about what you had for lunch today or for breakfast or whatever the case might be. And if you think about those foods that made up that meal, there is nothing in your body that is made out of a hamburger or that is made out of bread. So when we look at the process of digestion, what we're actually considering is what our body has to do to that food to get it into a usable form. So if you think about the things that you put into your system, there are all sorts of different elements that made up that food, and those elements will vary depending on what you're eating. But if you think about something like cheese, you're going to have some water content in there, which means you have some hydrogen, you have some oxygen, you have some calcium that's going to be present in that cheese. And so there would be other things as well. But what happens is once you put that food into your body, the process of digestion is actually geared at not keeping that food together as a whole, but breaking it apart and then isolating each one of those elements that are present in the food and making them an individual piece or component. And then what your body does is as you are trying to build muscle tissue or you are trying to build skin, it will take those individual components and it will pull them and then rebuild them into what your body actually needs. So when we look at the process of digestion, it is a very destructive process. It's taking the food as you put it in, breaking it down to get it into its individual components so that your body can then select and pull what it needs and then rebuild the tissues and other materials that you need somewhere in your body. So when we talk about having a balanced diet, it is incredibly important because you need to make sure that you have that stockpile of all those different elements and minerals available so that when your body goes to build those tissues, it has everything that it does need to do that properly. You think about a grocery store stocking their shelves, and they have a wide variety for people to pick from. And likewise, your body needs to have a wide variety of elements and other materials to pick from so it can properly build everything. So when you initially put in food, the process of ingestion, it will then go through two types of digestion. Mechanical, which means we're using muscle to break it down. So your stomach contracting, mashing the food down, your jaw opening and closing to chew up food. Because muscles are involved with that process, we call that mechanical digestion. Then we have chemical digestion. Muscles alone can't get food to small enough pieces so that we'll actually be able to tap into all the things that are available. So we use different types of chemicals all throughout the body to break the food down further so we can tap into everything that is actually available in the foods that you have put into your system. So when we use enzymes, when we use acids, when we use things like that to aid in the process of digestion, that is chemical digestion. Propulsion, looking at the digestive tract from mouth all the way through your digestive system until unused food would exit the body, that is not something that the food is just going to be able to move and navigate on its own. So we use a series of muscle contractions to help move the food forward and moving through the digestive tract. And that process is what we call propulsion. Absorption. This is the actual point where body is going or food is going to be absorbed into the body so that we actually can get some sort of benefit from the things that we have eaten. And then defecation, there are certain things that we just are not able to use for whatever reason. Sometimes it simply passes through our body too quickly. We were not able to access it and use material from it. Things like cellulose, we have no digestive enzyme present in the human body to break down cellulose. So because we can't break it down, it will pass through our system and leave us. So things like celery, lettuce, apple, the skin of an apple, if you don't chew it up very well, the body is going to exit the body the same way it went in, just because we don't have anything that is able to break it down into smaller pieces. Looking at the major organs that we have in the human body, this is actually split into two sides for a reason. The organs that you see on the left-hand side are what we call accessory organs, and these are going to be the ones that don't actually touch the food itself. So they never come in direct contact with the food, but they do assist in the process of digesting it. So they add something to the process, but food never actually touches them or passes through them. The organs that we have on the right-hand side, food is actually going to have to pass through those structures as it makes its way through the digestive system. So the accessory organs are known as the salivary glands, the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. So they're going to provide something through the process, but the food doesn't actually touch them. And then on the other side, mouth, that's obviously where food would enter, the pharynx, where the nose and the mouth comes together as we begin the process of swallowing. Then down into the esophagus, it would move to the the stomach, then the small intestine, large intestine, and eventually exit the body through the rectum and anus. Now, I went through those fairly quickly because as we move through the remaining slides, I'm going to target those a little bit more on an individual basis. The next slide that I put in is actually what the alimentary canal looks like. So if we remove all those accessory structures and focus just on those places where food is actually going to pass through, this is what it looks like. And you can see that the mouth parts, so the tongue, very, very small in the scheme of things, the esophagus a little bit longer, than we have the stomach in there. And then you have this huge length of tubing that is going to be the small intestine. Now, the small intestine will range somewhere from 20 to 26 feet. That's typically the range you'll see it identified as. Women tend to stay in the 20s, lower 20s, and guys will get into the longer lengths just because the torso of a guy tends to be a little bit longer, so there's more room in there. But somewhere to 20 to 26 feet. And the small intestine is actually broken up into three different parts. So you have the first part of the small intestine, which is the duodenum, then you have the jejunum, and you have the ileum. And as food passes through those three different parts of the small intestine, different things are happening. You have a certain part where you have more absorption taking place than you do in other parts of the small intestine, but you can see what that looks like collectively. And then we have the large intestine at the end, a little bit shorter, typically is going to be around 3 to 4 feet in length in the human body. But just to kind of show you what that looks like and deconstruct it in a way that you can see it a little bit better. So the first thing that we have are the mouth structures. So obviously this is where food is going to enter into the body. You have the teeth structure, the tooth structure, excuse me. And with that, you have in a child, you would see 20 teeth. And in little guys, you want there to be gaps and spaces between their teeth. Because as we grow into adulthood, we move from 20 teeth as a child up to 32 teeth as an adult. And so as those additional teeth come in, you need there to be room for that. So the spacing that you see between your kids' teeth, that is a good thing. Some people immediately think they're going to have to put braces on their kids. Not the case. You are giving those adult teeth the room that they need when they do move in. In the design of the teeth, again, nothing happens by chance. And if you think about the teeth in the mouth, the thin, narrow teeth are up to the front, and the broad, flat teeth are more towards the back. And the narrow teeth are up front because those are the teeth that you're going to use to bite into something, an apple, or if you're eating a piece of chicken or a hamburger. But those teeth are the ones that are going to bite in and actually rip away the food from the source. Once you have it in your mouth, the tongue will position it and line it up in between those broad, flat teeth. And now every time you chew, the benefit that you're getting is you are crushing that food and you're increasing the exposed surface area on the food that you have eaten. The reason that that's important is because as it continues through the process of digestion and it gets into the stomach, it's going to increase the amount of area that those acids and those enzymes are going to be able to work on. So when you hear things like you should chew your food 100 times before you swallow, that's more for your raw vegetables, meats, and things like that. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to grind them up as much as possible, expose as much surface area so that as it continues the process, more of those acids can get to the food and help the digestive process even more. Obviously, we have some foods that you would not be able to do that to. Yogurt, Twinkies, things like that, you're not going to be able to chew 100 times. But it's not as hard for the acid to get into those food molecules either. So the tongue plays a very important role in getting everything positioned and lined up. The teeth, their positioning is very important in the process as well. And then we have the salivary glands. If you move on to the next slide, you have a total of 6 salivary glands, 3 on each side, and you have the parotid, you have the submandibular, and you also have the sublingual salivary glands. Now, the parotid are going to be up high, and if you actually look at the gland itself, if you can see it in the picture, it comes back to about where your ear is, and you can see a duct that comes forward and then is going to inject the saliva into the mouth. Now, that is a very important structure because the saliva is actually produced within that gland, and then it's going to use the duct to make its way into the mouth. And you can also see the gland structure for the sublingual as well as the submandibular. Those are going to sit along the bottom jaw and along the tongue. So they're a little bit lower in position. Now, with those salivary glands, they're introducing that saliva and one of the first digestive enzymes that we have, which is amylase. Amylase is going to digest sugars and starches. So anything that is carbohydrate based is going to be broken down by this amylase. It's the reason why when you put a piece of hard candy into your mouth, that over time it gets smaller and smaller and eventually disappears, because that amylase is taking those sugars and digesting them, and then you swallow them. Or if you've ever had a piece of gum and it starts out as a big wad of gum, and after a little bit of chewing it, it's much smaller, because that amylase has digested away any of the sugar that is present in that gum. So that is what the salivary glands are going to offer to the process of digestion, is really kicking off and getting those carbs broken down. Again, with anatomy, everything is strategic. So if we're breaking down carbohydrates immediately as they come into the body or starting that process, there's a reason why. Carbohydrates are the first energy source that we burn off. So when you think about all of the calories that you put into your body on a given day, all of those sugars, starch, calories that come from carbs, those are going to be what you burn through first. So we immediately start that process upon introducing food to the body, and it's going to get targeted right there in the mouth. So once we swallow the food, and again, the design of the mouth, very specific. You have the arch to your jawline. You also have the arch if you put your tongue to the roof of your mouth. And all of that is designed so that as that food is getting moved around your mouth, it gets rolled into a ball. And eventually, by the time you're ready to swallow that ball of food, it's been very moistened with saliva. So we worked that amylase in, coated it very well, helps with the process of swallowing, but also really kicks off that digestive process as well. So once we have it in that ball, it's called a bolus, B-O-L-U-S, and we will swallow it, and it will make its way down the esophagus. And the esophagus is lined with nerves. So inside that esophagus tube, you will have nerves, and as the bolus hits those nerves, it tells the muscles right above that ball of food to contract. So gravity does not take food down to your stomach. It trips those nerves. Nerves tell the muscles to contract. And as those muscles contract, it pushes the food down. The bolus hits the next set of nerves. And so the muscles contract again. And it will keep that process going until the food makes its way down into the stomach itself. So you can see a picture of the esophagus on the left. On the right of that slide, it shows you a cross-section of an esophagus and what that looks like. And most people, when we talk about the esophagus, we describe it as a tube. But when the esophagus is not being used, you'll notice that it collapses down almost flat. So it's not a tube that stays open and has a nice round structure to it. But when not in use, it will flatten almost completely down. And that's what you're seeing in that picture that you have on the right-hand side. So once we use the esophagus to transfer the food down to the stomach, Now the stomach is going to, again, be designed in a way to maximize what it needs to do. You have two sphincter muscles in the stomach. So where the esophagus leads into the stomach, there's a sphincter muscle right there. And a sphincter muscle is a muscle that makes a complete circle around a structure. So right where the esophagus connects to the stomach, we have a sphincter muscle, and right where the stomach leads into the small intestine or the duodenum, we have another sphincter muscle. Now these are very important because once the food gets introduced to the stomach, we need it to stay there for 3 to 4 hours. And so those sphincter muscles will collapse down tight and make sure that the stomach is, or the food is going to remain in the stomach for the time period that it needs to. So if you are one of those that were told you couldn't go swimming for 30 minutes after you ate something, it actually should have been more like 3 or 4 hours, because that's how long that food is going to remain in the stomach before it continues on its journey. You'll also notice inside the stomach that it is not flat. You can see what are called rugae. They are wrinkles and folds and bumps that you have on the inside of the stomach. And what they actually do is they increase the surface area. So the inside of the stomach is not smooth, but it has all of these bumps and these folds. So it gives more places for that food to get mashed down. So the food gets into those wrinkles and those folds, and then the whole stomach as one unit will actually contract. And as it contracts, it squeezes and presses down on that food. It gets mashed in between those wrinkles. It helps to flatten it out, expose more surface area. And now the acids in your stomach can get further into that food and help the process of digestion. The two images that you guys have on the left, those are actually showing you the muscles on the outside of the stomach. And you'll notice that they run in all different directions. So you have some muscles that run left to right. You have some that are diagonal. It doesn't show you the ones that are running more in a vertical range, but that is so as that stomach contracts, no matter where the food is, it's going to get mashed down in that process. So we have that food there for 3 to 4 hours. The stomach is using mechanical digestion to contract and mash down the food. It's also introducing a variety of chemicals and enzymes to help the chemical digestion side of things. So if you look at the next slide, it talks about some of the productions that we have in the stomach. Now, we had carbohydrates that were getting digested in the mouth. When we get to the stomach, it's going to target anything that is protein-based. So things like meat, peanut butter, eggs, things that are high in protein content, they are actually going to get digested in your stomach. So you can chew them up in your mouth and get them smaller that way. But if you've ever had something that you didn't like to eat, vegetables, and you chewed them up for a little bit and then you just kind of tucked them inside of your mouth, well, it's not like the hard candy that will get smaller and smaller over time. That's going to stay there because there's no digestive enzyme in your mouth that can break down that food. Now, once we swallow it, anything that is protein-based is going to start the process. It's going to be introduced to its digestive enzyme. Now, that digestive enzyme is known as pepsin. So pepsin is in the stomach and digests protein. Now, the thing about digesting protein is that if you think about it, pretty much everything in your body has some sort of protein involved in it. You have protein in your skin, in your cell membranes, in your muscle tissue, in your organs. It is absolutely everywhere. So we have to be very careful with pepsin because it's not going to just target the protein in the foods that you guys eat. It's going to target any protein it comes in contact with. So the body had to design a way that we could have this digestive enzyme in our system, but not digest things that were actually part of our body. And it actually did this in two ways. First way that it did it is by creating a very thick mucus lining. So it talks about goblet cells. Goblet cells are the cells we have in the human body that are going to produce mucus. And in the stomach, you have lots of them, and they provide a very thick layer of mucus in the stomach, and it prevents that pepsin from ever coming in contact directly with the lining of the stomach. So that mucus lining is very, very important. Now, the pepsin is actually produced somewhere else and used in the stomach. So to make sure that in moving the pepsin from where it's made to the stomach to be used, that it's not able to digest protein, it actually creates pepsin in an inactive form, and that is called pepsinogen. So pepsinogen is going to be inactive, can come in contact with protein. It's not going to do anything whatsoever. It's moved to the stomach and introduced to the stomach. It does not convert over to pepsin until it comes in contact with hydrochloric acid. There is only one place in the entire body that we have hydrochloric acid, and that's going to be in the lining of the stomach. You have a very special set of cells known as parietal cells, and they're basically like these jets, and they will jet in this hydrochloric acid to the stomach, and it will combine with the pepsinogen. When the hydrochloric acid and the pepsinogen come together, at that point and that point only does it turn over into pepsin, and now it can start digesting proteins. So that is the way that your body works very carefully to monitor when and how that pepsin is put to use. From there, it talks about the pancreas, and this is another one of our accessory structures. So the pancreas is unique in the fact that it actually has both endocrine and exocrine features. So it is able to act like an exocrine gland, and we'll talk about exo and endocrine glands a little bit more later. But exocrine glands produce secretions that will leave the body. Endocrine glands will produce secretions that are going to be used in the body. So to have an organ or a gland that has a dual feature that does both is a little bit unique. Now, in the case of digestion, the pancreas is going to produce what is known as insulin. And insulin is going to take the glucose that you guys have from the foods that you've eaten and allow your body to be able to access it. So when you break that food down, and we talked about this before, it will take the foods that you have put into your system and break them down into their simplest forms. And one of the simplest forms of sugar is glucose. So it breaks it down to glucose. That glucose is going to get absorbed into your bloodstream, but it's stuck in your bloodstream until we introduce insulin. Insulin is kind of like the key that opens up the door to your cells. So for those people that don't produce the right amount of insulin, they don't have the key to unlock the cells. The glucose can never get from their bloodstream over to their cells for their cells to be able to use it. So when we talk about diabetes and things like that, and insulin not being produced at all or being produced in very low amounts, what's happening is these people eat, they digest their foods, that glucose moves into the bloodstream, and then it's stuck there. So the cells can never get to the glucose to use it. It would be the equivalent if you filled up your gas tank, and then once the gas tank was full, you just kept pumping gas in. So if you don't ever turn on the car and run the car and let that gas be consumed by using the car, obviously you're going to have a problem. So we need to open up those cells, let the glucose move into the cells so it can be burned off. And that's why people that have diabetes have to check their blood sugar, because you want to make sure that it's not continuing to increase because the cells are not able to use it and burn it off. Now, the pancreas does a lot more than just that, but for our purposes of digestion, that's kind of where we need to leave things for right now. So go ahead and move on to your slide that looks at the liver. Now, the liver is another structure that we could spend a huge amount of time on. There's over 200 things that the liver does for the human body. One of the biggest things is it's one of our three major filters. So we have the liver, we have the kidneys, and we have the spleen, our three big filters of the human body. And the liver is going to target toxins, especially toxins that are introduced from outside sources. And one of the biggest things that the liver will do is it's going to be responsible for producing bile. Bile is a third digestive enzyme that we need to talk about, and made in the liver, it is then moved to the gallbladder where it's stored. And then when we actually need to use it, you can see the duct coming off of the gallbladder there. It would be injected into the small intestine, and that's where it would be used. So the gallbladder or the bile is going to actually target anything that is fat-based. So we take care of carbs in the mouth, we take care of proteins in the stomach, and now we get all the way to the small intestine and we're going to target fat. Now, fat is a very sticky substance and fat molecules love to stick to each other. So the process of bile is not so much digesting them, but the bile is basically going to take these large chunks of fat and break them into smaller chunks so that they can actually be absorbed into the body and make their way into the bloodstream. So how we initially take them in, they're usually too fat, the globules are too big, we'd never be able to absorb them. So the process of bile just takes those big sticky pieces of fat, breaks them down into smaller ones, and makes our body able to access them. Now, from there, we have the small intestine. And I already talked about the 3 sections. The duodenum comes immediately off of the stomach. And then we have the jejunum, and then the transition from the small intestine into the large intestine that happens at the ileum, which is the 3rd and final piece of the small intestine. Now, the small intestine is important because this is where a majority of absorption takes place. So from the mouth to the esophagus to the stomach, all of that has been simply geared at breaking the food down, getting it into very small pieces. And with the addition of the saliva and the digestive enzymes in the stomach, by the time the food gets to your small intestine, it no longer resembles anything close to how it went in. It's a very thick, soupy mixture that is called chyme, C-H-Y-M-E. And so this very thick, soupy mixture is going to make its way through the small intestine. And now we're going to start pulling out the nutrients and the minerals and the vitamins that are present in the foods that we have eaten and transfer them over to the body. The food is not considered to be part of your body until it transitions from the small intestine into the bloodstream. Once it's in the bloodstream, it's internal. Everything up to that point, it is considered to be external. Now, inside the small intestine, you guys have what are known as villi. Villi are these tiny little projections. They stick off of the wall of the small intestine, and basically they're straws. So you have this thick, soupy mixture that is running through this 20 to 26 foot long tube. And off the inside wall of the small intestine, you have all these little straws. And so as that thick, soupy mixture passes over those straws, they pull out the vitamins, the minerals, and the nutrients. And right on the other side of those villi is a bunch of capillaries, tiny little blood vessels. And as that's pulled out, it diffuses over into the bloodstream, and now it's in your body, and you guys can put it to use. Very much like the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide in the alveoli and the capillaries, same sort of setup here. We just use villi to help pull out those beneficial materials and get them moved into the bloodstream. Now, the thing about the small intestine, 20 to 26 feet long, we have to have a way to pack all of that in a 5 to 6 foot frame. So the small intestine obviously is not stretched out. It weaves back and forth in the core of the abdomen, and that's how we pack that long tube into a smaller space. Again, nothing happens by chance. The reason that we pack it in that way is, number one, we could never be that tall. But number two, the villi only extend off the very surface of the inside of the small intestine. They don't go all the way through. So if you think about it, in theory, you could have some of that chyme mixture go right through the middle of that tube and never touch any of the villi. And if that were to happen, you are not getting any of the vitamins or minerals out of that chyme mixture. So by having all the turns and folds of that small intestine and having it weave back and forth, the benefit to that is, think about a water bottle. Bottle flips are a big thing right now. But if you take your water bottle and you do a bottle flip with it, that water flips, turns over, hits the walls, and changes its position within the bottle. Your chyme mixture will do the same thing. So that chyme that was passing right through the middle of your small intestine, now as the small intestine flips or turns, that chyme mixture gets flipped as well, and hopefully we eventually get it to pass over those villi so that you can access and pull out as much of that beneficial material as possible. It will continue to move through the small intestine, making its way to the large intestine, and the large intestine has 3 parts as well. Now, the small intestine stays pretty much to the core or the middle of the abdomen. The large intestine is going to frame out the outside of your abdomen. So part of the large intestine comes up the outside, comes across the top, and then down the other side. So you have the ascending colon. That's going to be the section that comes up. You have the transverse colon, which comes across, and then you have the descending colon, which is going to move back down. At the very end, you have what is known as the sigmoid colon, and it is the last part that your solid waste would make before it exits the body. Now, a couple of features about the large intestine. The biggest thing that it's attempting to do is to extract any excess water that you guys have in that chyme mixture. So it's a thick, soupy mixture as it's passing through your small intestine. But you guys know, for the most part, when it exits the body, it's transitioned into a more solid form. And the reason for that is, as it passes through the large intestine, the water content, or as much of the water content as possible, is going to get extracted out and returned to the body. Now, this is a design feature back from caveman era, when water was not readily accessible. You couldn't go to the faucet and turn it on and get water. So the body had to do whatever it could to conserve whatever water it did have. And this is one of the things that it actually did in order to maintain as much water as possible. So the large intestine is going to pull out that excess water, return it back to the body. So we move from that chyme mixture into a more solid waste form. And then you have a series of nerves at the end of the colon, which when you get enough of that solid waste built up, it will trigger those nerves. They then will tell the muscles in that area that you need to use the restroom. Those muscles contract, and that gives you the sensation that you have solid waste that needs to be voided from the body. There are times where, unfortunately, something happens and the chyme mixture does not stay in the large intestine for as long as it should. If you are sick, if your body feels like there is something maybe wrong with the food that you have put into your body, it might speed up the process of how fast it's moving through your system. And if it does that, it's not going to stay in the large intestine long enough. The large intestine does not have time to extract that excess water. It simply leaves your body in that chyme mixture form. And that is what we would refer to as diarrhea. You also have situations where too much water is extracted. And when you pull out too much water from that solid waste, unfortunately, what happens is it's not going to pass through the body as easily. It becomes very uncomfortable to try and void that solid waste out. And that would be what we know as constipation. So kind of an explanation as to kind of what happens when things don't function properly within that large intestine. So that is our overview over the digestive chapter. One last piece that I did want to talk about. We talked about the digestion of carbs in the mouth, protein in the stomach, and fat in the small intestine. Now, those are the only three places that your calories come from in the human body. So I know you look at food labels and you've got all this information on the food labels nowadays, but the only three that are going to indicate where your calories are coming from, you get 4 calories for every 1 gram of carbohydrates that you put into 1 gram of carbohydrate that you put into your system. So if you eat something that has 20 grams of carbs, that is then going to translate into 80 total calories. So 4 calories for every 1 gram. If you eat 20 grams of carbohydrates, that's 4 times 20. That would tell you that you're going to get 80 calories just from carbohydrates. Protein is going to also be 4 calories for every 1 gram. So again, if you eat something that has 10 grams of protein in it, 4 calories for every 1 gram, 4 times 10, you're getting 40 calories just from the protein content of that food. Now, when we look at fat, fat jumps up. It's 9 calories for every 1 gram. So if you eat something that has 10 grams of fat in it, we're taking that 9 times 10, 90 calories are coming from fat out of that food. So that's why a lot of times when people diet, the thing that they eliminate is going to be fat, because that's where the highest volume of calories is going to come from. In the scheme of things, I already mentioned that your body will burn off carbs first. So any calories that come into your body that are carbohydrate based, that is what you're going to burn through. Then you go into your fat and your fat reserves, and your body will only burn off protein if it is an emergency situation. You guys need protein in so many other places. You need it in your skin, your cells, your organelles, your muscles, your organs. It is needed everywhere, DNA. So your body does not want to take the protein that you give it and use it as an energy source. It wants to use it as a building block for all the structures in your system. The only time you will ever burn protein as a calorie source or for fuel is because you are starving, whether that is self-induced or from just environmental situations, you don't have access to food. But that is the only time that you would resort to taking protein and burning it off. So the problem with that is usually if we're to that point, you are taking protein that is already built into your body. So you are pulling protein out of your existing muscle. You are taking protein out of those existing structures and using it to burn as a fuel source. So if you know of people, or if you have background in people that have eating disorders, one of the things is you have these teenagers and these people that are in their early 20s and they're dying of heart attacks, cardiac arrest. And it's because of the fact that they took so much protein out of their muscle tissue, including their heart, that their heart could no longer function and support them. And so that's why you see heart issues being a very real thing for those people that are struggling with eating disorders, because their body has had to strip that protein out of their existing structures and use it as an energy source instead. All right, so I made a video for your lab. Make sure that you guys watch that prior to doing the lab. The only thing you have to cover this week as far as the labs, because there's 2 labs in that kit, you are only doing the digestive one. Please do not do the urinalysis one or the dialysis one quite yet. I will give you another set of instructions next week for how to carry that one out. Same process as always. You have the lab sheet that you need to fill out. And once you guys fill out that lab sheet, snap a picture of it and send it to me. If you have any questions between now and then, please let me know. But that due date will be next Wednesday at 11:59 p.m.